Friend of mine, haven't seen him for a while, Oliver North. How you doing, Ollie?
Dan, it's great to be with you again. Thank you. And congratulations on a great time slot you've got and the ratings you're pulling for Real America. Well done, buddy.
Thank you so much, Ollie. Really appreciate that. Where do we begin with these scandals? I mean, every couple of days we're getting more information, yet I'm still holding on to hope that someday the big 3, 4, 5, whatever you want to call them, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, the rest of them, MSNBC, will actually cover this and put it on the air. But let's start with, to me, the most current and the biggest one, the threat of China and a Biden presidency. More emails leaked showing the connection with this energy firm, showing payments, as we heard from Rudy's email there, showing that Joey from the block actually took some money from his kid. So we know this was all dealings within the family where dad's at the top collecting a big paycheck because you're not worth $15-20 million off of a $193,000 senator salary or a $230,000 vice president salary. So some cash is coming in. He was taking it. And if he becomes president, what can we expect, Ali? I'm worried.
Well, we ought to be. And by the way, just to come back to something you said just a moment ago, where is the so-called mainstream media on this thing? I mean, I'm looking at a story that ought to be just exploding all over the place. We know it's being censored by social media. We know that they're being basically told by some of the Communist Chinese closest friends, big tech in California, that this story is not to go anywhere. The bottom line of it is there ought to be investigative reporters in every major news outlet, print, broadcast, whatever, about what's happening with this presidential candidate. We've never had, as the candidate for president of the United States, anyone who's done anything close to what's being alleged by these emails. These emails have been hidden now for years. I mean, remember, it goes all the way back to the first investigations about what was Hunter Biden doing in the Ukraine? What was Hunter Biden doing with the Russians? Now we know that our arch enemy, and I call it in a book you've already been sent, America's #1 adversary, they know they intend to dominate the world. And what we're looking at is a president who's got financial connections that have never been revealed, a presidential candidate or a candidate for president of the United States who has done deals with a communist government in Beijing. If that's even close to what ought to be investigated in the next 17 or 18 days, we need to make sure the American people get this word. And congratulations for you and Fox News, my old employer, for bringing this out. The reality of it is the stories that in the New York Post describe exactly the kind of thing we should never have in the office of the President of the United States.
Yeah, and in contrast, they tried to, for the last 4 years, frame a president for connections to Russia, which now we know were totally false and bogus. Yep. But yet we have evidence about this presidential candidate having connections to China. The evidence is in front of them, not fake dossiers and FBI agents texting each other in the middle of an affair, making sure they got a plan to stop Donald Trump from becoming president. Here we've got emails from the guy's son directly saying, hey, a couple more scratch here and some scratch there, and I'll get you with the big guy, and the connections are made, and here's the payments. It's right there. And what blows my mind, Ali, is just several months ago, before COVID all started, let's go back last year, not that long ago, the mainstream media, they were doing these interviews with Joe, even with Hunter, taking them to task, holding their feet to the fire because they thought they were going to see maybe a Bernie or a different candidate actually get the presidential nomination on the Democratic ticket. And so they were holding his feet to the fire. And then as soon as he was their boy and they put him on a pedestal, no more attacks. Now fast forward to this week, all this damaging evidence and nothing. Silence. And as you said, social media silencing everyone that puts it out there.
Well, censoring it, actually censoring these kinds of stories. And the reality of it is what you could end up with is the vice presidential candidate becoming the president of the United States, if indeed in that period of time between November 3rd, let's just worst case scenario, he wins the election on November 3rd. And then the FBI discloses what the investigation really ought to be showing is criminal activity, and he gets indicted.
Right, and he has to
He's
step
not president yet. And suddenly, who's going to be president?
And Nancy Pelosi just set it all up with the 25th Amendment the other day, right? Saying we're going to start a commission. Oh, my gosh. It's all coming together. And she's right when she said this isn't about the current president, it's about future ones. It is. It was a little bit about the president to kind of damage his credibility a smidge. But let's be real. It's exactly what you just said. If Biden wins by some crazy chance, and God help us if that happens in our nation, then they can remove him from office, and we have President Kamala Harris and a radical left-wing agenda.
Yep. Well, I think that's what they intend to do. I'm not a grand conspiracy theorist.
Me neither.
I have a deep belief that that's what they intend to have happen.
Well, the setup's there.
The expectation is, look at here's the problem. Here is the real problem. This is the #1 adversary of the United States of America. It's the person of Xi Jinping, but it's really the People's Republic of China, the communist Chinese government, that is actually doing all of the things that they need to do to become the dominant power on the planet Earth. And, our newspapers have been full and broadcasts have been full about the confirmation of a new Supreme Court justice, right? And so they've tried to throw the book at her, and we now know she is going to be confirmed.
Yeah.
There's no doubt in anybody's mind.
Right.
This ought to be the #1 story in the country right now. And what was Hunter Biden doing as a, quote, energy expert for the People's Republic of China, just like he'd been doing in the Ukraine and just like he was doing with Russia?
The only thing that guy knows about energy is trying to get enough energy to get out of bed to grab his crack pipe, judging by looking at those pictures that were leaked. Yeah. I mean, let's be real. Yeah. The guy had no experience. He was a screw-up. Daddy came to his rescue to get him a job, but does Daddy do it to help his son or to help himself? If you saw the last email that Rudy just put out there, to me, it's Daddy wanted to make more money, and we use the son as the intermediator to try and cover his own butt. That's what it looks like to me.
Well, and it sure looks like that. It ought to look like that to every investigative reporter on the planet Earth. What an incredibly powerful story this is, with the allegations against this man who stands a chance about being elected between now and November 3rd, on November 3rd, becoming the next elected official. And in the time between November 3rd and January 21st, he gets indicted, and then Kamala Harris becomes president of the United States.
Ali, you've gone through a lot in your life over the last 40, 50 years. You've been grilled by subcommittees. You've been on national television. You've hosted your own show. You've been grilled by reporters and investigative journalists for decades and decades. What did you think about last night's debate and the massive contrast? Because I watched Savannah Guthrie clench her jaw and almost lean out of the seat to attack the president. NBC's production value was at best. I watch ABC. They have the music. They have these intros and outros reading us things about Article 2 of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And George is laid back with his legs crossed, casually asking questions, never holding his feet to the fire. I mean, if you couldn't see the massive contrast and if people just don't, wake up and look at what they're doing. It was just so apparent last night. Your take?
Dan, again, this is another example of what's happened in our so-called mainstream media and our social media. When you look at the kinds of questions, she posed, 40 some odd questions to the president, right? She let the so-called people of America who were there in this town hall ask 10 questions.
Wow.
You look at the coverage of what people said about I thought the president was remarkably calm.
Oh, he was.
I switched back and forth to watch as much as I could of both. But the bottom line of it was he was extremely patient.
Yes.
His responses to the young Americans who were in that room, participating in this town hall, I thought were remarkable.
Did you see him say thank you and smile at her each time in between? Very nice and polite. I loved it. Although I did like that little jab where he's like, oh, that's cute. That was kind of nice. But you're right. The Biden one, people got to ask the questions, not George. Right. George didn't go after him whatsoever. Didn't even bring up the Ukraine connection and this China scandal. Didn't even bring it up. Barely held him to task on fracking, his flip-flopping there, on stacking the Supreme Court, which he point-blank said, well, I'm leaving it on the table. So he didn't say he's not open to it or that he is. He left it totally wide open.
No, he had to put it that way because those of us who are reasonable people in America don't want the Supreme Court packed. They don't want it stacked. They want the Supreme Court to stay at 9 justices, and they want the president to be able to appoint them. And that's one of the big issues on this election. He couldn't say, I am going to do it, because it would drive away the centrists. And there are some left. Yeah. Okay. The bottom line of it is he scares the living daylights out of the rest of us.
I'm scared. I'll totally admit it, and I'm really worried, and I hope that Americans wake up before November 3rd. They're giving me the rap. You know how that goes. You're used to having somebody in your ear, Ali. Real quick, I know that you are pushing a guest that we had on before, his book, Richard Levine. It's an amazing book, America's #1 Adversary. Tell us where to get that book, because folks aren't going to get the information about China being our #1 threat, so they got to read that book because the mainstream media is not going to cover it.
Amazon's got it, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. Go to their websites. You can have the thing overnight. You can get it online immediately if you want to do it with an ebook. But it's a great read. It's not that long. You can read the whole thing well in advance of this election, and everybody ought to be reading it.
Ollie, you're welcome back on Real America anytime, sir.
Thank you, Dan. It's great being with you again.
Yep, nice seeing you. Thank you. All right, have a good weekend. Straight ahead after the break, as the evidence continues to pour in, proving that the Russian hoax was entirely made up by the Clinton campaign back in 2016, a handful of brave patriots from Hollywood debuting a new film called Obamagate. Actor Dean Cain joins Real America to fill us in on his role as that disgraced FBI agent. Don't go away.